Hey class, welcome back. We're going to get on to our last set of notes for the Unit 1 Living World, the soil system, soil and soil dynamics, soil formation, erosion. The soil system, to begin with, we have a draw it here, just to break down a nice little pie chart for what the components of the soil system are made up of. About 45% is the minerals themselves, the rock, the worn down, weathered rock, that is now our mineral component of soil. We have the organic matter, the living tissues, the living parts of system in about 5%. We have air and water making up a collective 50% of soil, so the space, the porosity between containing air and water. How is soil formed? Soil is formed through a very long process of weathering bedrock. The bedrock weathers, breaks apart. Mosses and lichens grow on top and decay and break down the rock itself, and we start to form organic debris and organic layer, just like we talked about in primary succession. We get the grasses and shrubs to start to grow on top, and the bedrock in that young soil continues to break down. Ultimately, we end up with mature soil that's able to support more biodiversity, more life, the decomposers like bacteria and fungi to help to manage the soil system, the complete soil system as we know it. Soil formation. Soils are formed when parent material is weathered, transported and deposited, like we mentioned earlier. The most common way we think about soil being formed is physical weathering. This is wind and rain, freezing and thawing of the rock component, breaking it into smaller and smaller pieces. Erosion, just as a simple definition, the movement of soil from wind and water, so being able to move that soil components and deposit them so that they can build up is another way of that formation. Certainly there's chemical weathering, the lichens and mosses creating weak acids to break apart the rock and help wear that down. And we have biological weathering, which is really something like tree roots or mosses growing in cracks and breaking apart the rocks themselves. And again, it's all about breaking down this bedrock and forming this organic layer of soil, or this mineral layer of soil. Soil horizons, once they're kind of completely set up, they stratify in these layers. 4 main layers is O is our organic layer. This is humus and leaf litter. So this is our really dark, black, rich soil that sits right on top of our topsoil. Topsoil is minerals with the humus. This is where the highest concentration of nutrients are, nitrogen in the soil. That's A, horizon A. Moving further down, horizon B is our subsoil. This is where the kind of leached metal ions, salts, minerals, roots grow down into this layer. We start to see a higher concentration of clay soils in that material. And then finally, C horizon is the parent material, the partially weathered rock that's set up there. Soil particles. Soil is made up of 3 major particles: sand, which is the biggest, silt, which is going to be the next particle size, so we have kind of a means of comparison to kind of draw these out, and then finally clay is really, really tiny, fine particles of soil. These 3 components help to make up what we call soil texture of a particular ecosystem. Soil has a lot of characteristics. 3 important ones we'll talk about is porosity, permeability, and water holding capacity. Porosity is really just an idea about the pores in the soil, the space within the soil. Sand is going to have the largest porosity because the particles, the soil particles themselves are larger, so the space between them is larger, more porous. Clay, less porous, and silt right in between. Permeability is the rate at which the soil allows water to move through it, to permeate through it, and so it's really representing how fast water can drain through this soil sample. If you have more porosity, you have a higher permeability. A water holding capacity is how well water is held by the soil. A higher porosity is a lower water holding capacity. So you can see sand is going to have the worst water holding capacity, but the highest porosity and permeability. Whereas clay has the best water holding capacity. This water is not going to move through this very well because it has very low porosity and a low rate of permeability. Soil texture is determined by the relative amounts of sand, silt, and clay. We have the soil texture triangle, which we'll be getting into in a second. But the silt, the sand, and the clay are going to be the ones that determine what the texture is. And all the textures we have are inside of this triangle. You can see the different categories there. Ultimately, soil texture matters for a number of reasons, but the main reason is effective soil fertility. Fertile soils are going to have more nutrients in them. More sandy soils will drain more quickly. More clayey soils are going to hold on to water and nutrients, but can waterlog plants. And silty and loam soils are really well balanced. So that's kind of what we put as the best overall soil type when we're talking about agricultural soils and their benefits. Working our way through soil texture practice, one thing we need to look at is trying to determine soil texture by the distribution of particles, sand, silt, and clay. So in this example, I have sand, silt, and clay. 35% silt, 35% sand, clay, and 30% sand. So we're going to use the triangle, and you can label this and draw it up as we go here about how this works. So basically, you have a percent sand, it's 30%. So we find 30 here and mark it, and then we draw our line all the way across. We find our percent silt, and then we go down to the left, which is 35% silt. And then clay, 35% straight across here. So where these intersect is the soil texture. In this case, we have clay loam. Soil issues, there's a number of soil issues that occur in our soil system. One is salinization, which is increasing salts in the soil. So evaporating water, if we waterlog soils or overwater soils, we can leave the dissolved salts behind, and this can stop plant growth. So heavy irrigation in dry climates tends to be a cause for that. Erosion, the movement of topsoil from wind and flowing water. Anthropogenic causes for this are human causes. Overgrazing, deforestation, irrigation can lead to this. Soil compaction is a compression of soil by heavy traffic and use, reduces water holding, and increases erosion. Anthropogenic causes, tractors, foot traffic, and livestock. So just trampling and compacting the soil. And then finally, loss of soil fertility. Nutrients in soil are depleted by overuse and over time are not available to our plants. The anthropogenic causes for this is planting the same crops with similar nutrient needs that ultimately deplete the soil of those resources.